Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Maple Syrup Mandos podcast.
Hey guys, it's Anthony. Jacob's wrong. This actually is episode 5, so get it right next time, buddy.
I am Jacob, and with me today I have Anthony. Wave your hand, Anthony. Great. I have Paul. You can wave, Paul. And then Blaise, you can wave as well.
Yep, waving.
I actually believe Blaise that he waved. He would never lie to me. Today's topic that we're going to be focusing on is Force users and how to play them. Obviously, Star Wars is kind of all about the Force users, except for the best Star Wars TV show, but Andor, for those that don't know. But Star Wars Legion is no exception to that rule. And I think a lot of folks, especially people who are beginning to play Legion, don't necessarily understand some of the nuances of playing a Force user. And we're going to talk about some of those nuances, how we like to play Force users. And yeah, we're just gonna do that. So basically, I think, unless Paul wants to say something.
I have my mic muted. I said all right. Good job.
Oh, thanks, bro.
I was going to try and rebuttal about a good Star Wars story that doesn't involve a Force user. The only things I can think of are droids and the Ewok Adventure show.
Those are, not the best examples. Andor is kind of the only example, and Rogue One mostly counts. Book of Boba Fett had I was about to say operative Luke. He had operative Luke and Grogu, bro.
Luke. Yeah. Operative Din Djarin, it's I, Operative Luke. I'm here to take counterpart Grogu, but it's not on your unit card, Luke.
We play Legion very casually here. And in The Mandalorian Season 2.5, that is Book of Boba Fett. So basically the way we I sort of categorize Force users, and I think you could I think maybe these guys will agree, is kind of 3 different ways to run Force users, or how Force users tend to work. There's like the beat stick version of a Force user, which is like, I'm going to send my guy into your army and I'm going to chop them up. Cool lightsaber style. That's kind of all there is to them. Just like kill the opponent's units. Think like Rebel Ahsoka, Anakin, some of those fairly high attack power Jedi that kind of all their abilities are offensive. Then you have like support type Jedi or support type Force users, where most of what they're doing is supporting the rest of the army into doing like the cool stuff. They're usually pretty good at fighting, but that's not what makes them special. Like think Obi-Wan, protecting the army and allowing the army to stay at full health the whole time, or I think Inquisitors kind of fit into that role, maybe badly, but like they're there to intercept enemy Force users. Like that's the function that they're playing. They're not really out to kill a whole bunch of stuff. Think the generic Jedi commander, who has you could put direct on him. You could put bolster on him. Just very supportive type stuff. And then the last type of Force user, which is typically like the premium Force user that I think a lot of people gravitate toward because it's the highest ceiling of like fun Force shenanigans, is like what I would really call like a finesse playmaker. And I'm sure there's other ways to describe it, but kind of those Force users that they could put the entire game on their back through their unique abilities that only they can do in the game, and that basically you are in the game no matter how bad you're losing, as long as that Force user is on the table, able to like manipulate what the enemy is doing. And so think like Count Dooku, think Yoda, Darth Vader, like these Force users that will typically cost like over 200 points, like almost a quarter of your army when you get them out, and they can just do crazy stuff like Dooku. I mean, a lot of these guys can kill enemies too, and can be very effective offensive pieces. But generally speaking, they could do other stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, those are the three categories: beat sticks that we've sorted them into. Beat sticks, supports, and finesse playmakers is pretty wordy.
Finesse pieces, playmakers.
Yeah.
I think you could.
And I think there are things that every Force user has in common. So if you're new to the game, like, you'll notice if you look across Force users, they all have Pierce on their weapons in some variety. The lowest value is Pierce 1. The highest on a unit is Pierce 3 with, like, Vader and Anakin. But they have Pierce, which lets them cancel enemy defensive rolls, and we'll probably talk about that a little later in terms of how you use them and why that's a useful keyword. And they all... Every single one currently has red saves, which is interesting. Most of them have deflect. It's just the Inquisitors and Commander Luke that don't have deflect, but they have block, which is kind of a similar keyword. Not entirely, but they have strong defense. And yeah, so all of them fall into that category. The lowest the health they have is 5, right?
Yeah.
With Yoda and a couple of like the Inquisitors, Asajj, Jedi Operative, Jedi Knight. Yeah. And I think the other thing that is true, and when we talk about them, we will sort them into like we'll talk about like there are cheap Force users and expensive Force users, but really every Force user is an expensive unit. There is no Force user option that's a cheap unit. The cheapest you can run a Force user legally is like 90 something points with like a Jedi Knight.
It's a Jedi Knight with
like no Force upgrades, right?
Yeah. Basically just
So
a beat stick.
they're really coming in at like 100 points realistically or more. And when you look at the base profile that's listed on the card of those units and you compare them to an equivalent investment of points in Special Forces or Core, for every faction, they don't look super great on paper. So I think part of why people struggle with Force users is even the Force users that are like what we call like a beat stick, like a blender sort of unit that's supposed to be offensive, their stats really don't compare super well to the same points investment. So like Anakin Skywalker is probably one of the scariest Force users in the game. If you look at his stat pool, he has 6 red saves. He's generally surging to block. Not all the time, but most of the time. And he rolls 5 red, Pierce 3. And if you look at that, and that will, with the upgrades, he's running you like 200 points for that. If you invested the same points into like clones, you could bring like 2 full ARC Trooper squads, basically. Even a little bit more than that, and that's like 10 wounds, also usually surging, and they throw 20 black dice in melee. So you really need to have a good understanding of how to use them, because they can be much more effective than the equivalent points invested into like Special Forces or Core units. You just have to know how to play them in a way, and they play very differently than the multi-model generic units. Yeah. Does anybody have more to say about the categorization?
No, I like it.
Users?
I think it's like a good... I think Paul has said earlier, like, all the Force users can do things all of in common, like the Pierce and stuff, and they can... you can kind of, in some ways, make some of the Force users play a little differently, but their baseline of, like, what they're costed to do stays the same. Like, you can put Force Push on Ahsoka, make her kind of more a combat focus other than just a beat stick, or make it more supportive, which we can get into. But, I mean, I think playing with Force users is a very, like... understanding how to play them is a fundamental way to understand how to play the game, and also how your opponent plays a Force user as well.
Yeah. I think it might be helpful then to just talk about, like, when you're bringing a Force user generically, like any force user, like, what is the typical goal of a force user in a game of Legion? Like, do we think is like the best way to play them? What are you looking for when you get a force user on the board?
Well, I think it'll depend on sort of the rest of your list. But whatever you're taking them to do, it's to have a very specific plan or gimmick or strategy in mind. It's not like an expensive core unit or special forces unit where their plan is, I'm just gonna like have them be my my powerful unit, that throws a lot of dice out. Like you have a plan in mind to use their command cards to, utilize, whether it's if they're a beat stick, like targeting the right enemy units, going fast, surviving on a point for an extended period of time. And I think the issue that I think a lot of newer players have, and certainly that I had initially when I started dipping my toes into force users, is not really having a plan with them and just thinking, they're just going to carry my list, they're just going to be my powerful unit. It's like, no, every single one of them has a specific thing or gimmick that they want to do, and you have to plan around that. Like Paul was sort of indicating, if you don't really have a plan for how to use them and their unique skill set, you might as well just spend those points on like 2 units instead that throw like a whole bunch of dice. I think when a lot of new players will come in and they actually, when they realize, force users are kind of hard to play sometimes, I'm going to actually play lists without force users. A lot of the time, at least certainly for me, I started doing a lot better. Some of my best first lists were without force users. And then, slowly when I got better at the game and I managed to have more consistent play with those like focus pieces.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
I think force users make your list, especially you're entering the game. Like most units are moving and shooting, or like moving and meleeing, but force users have a different role, which it might be hard to understand in your first few goes of like they don't need to be attacking like the first round or second round even. But if they're able to do something that can help your army either give out tokens or help lead them towards the fight, I think that's a hard concept to understand, especially if the force user you're using, like there's a lot of keywords associated with force users that may not be so simple to understand. Even like the cheap ones have like their uses, but they're also kind of like Commander Luke is like 120 points or 110 points, but he's like, I think for a beginner, I think very hard to understand like what his purpose is in like a rebel army that you're making. So I think Jacob's right. I think having a purpose of going with what you want your list to do and function comes with playing that list and then saying, can I add Luke in here, or do I want operative Luke in here actually? What are you saying, Paul?
I think for me, and this we have been talking about this, people have been saying this for years, and I think it still rings true even in the new rules. Force users are scalpels. I think all of them are scalpels. They are very effective at very precise situations. And so my goal when I'm playing a force user is to manufacture a situation where the force user can apply that ability in a very specific area of the map or to a very specific enemy unit or group of enemy units. Even the strongest force users are really not going to stand up to just like moving and shooting and just like engaging whatever's nearest to them without really like a discrimination, without order control in the same way that you play a generic unit where like they can't effectively just like duke it out. Like you can't just leave a force user on a flank and be like, maybe he'll live, maybe they'll die. I think you often have a super specific goal, and I think every force user's goal is different, but ultimately they all come down to at some point they want to get into melee with enemy units and use their piercing lightsabers to chop down enemy units, and generally, and we'll talk more about this, it may not be true with the way that force pushes change, but generally they want to be flipping objectives in your favor. With their scalpel abilities, which scalpel basically means like high precision, very predictable, like precise damage or disruptive effects or support effects. But in the grand scheme of like points efficiency, maybe not super points efficient versus like a sledgehammer unit is sort of the dichotomy.
I want to add on to what Paul was
go
saying.
ahead.
Was like, yeah, just like getting your force user on the point, having them survive, and also an added bonus if they're able to get units to get onto that point and help you win that point. You know, that's also kind of, you can flip it both like using force powers, killing them, or helping your other units get up. So I think it varies in many ways. It's not just like you can go up and kill people on your objective, and that's like the objective of force user. It can be a multitude of ways.
Yep. So I think in light of that, there are plays that are good with every force user, and I think I would call them like the fundamentals of playing a force user, in terms of getting what you want out of them and both keeping them alive and getting them into a position where they can do the cool stuff that's on their command cards or their unit card that requires them generally to be close to your opponent. And the biggest thing, and I didn't include this on our list, but the biggest thing that I see new players do with force users is they see the ability deflect, which deflect is when a force user, not every force user has it, most of them do, when they get targeted by a ranged attack, they gain surge to block, and they deal 1 wound back to their opponent if they roll a surge on defense. So essentially every force user has surge to block if they have deflect. And so what a lot of new players interpret that as meaning is that the force users want to get shot. They view deflect as being part of the damage output of a force user. And if you look at like Star Wars media and movies, you can see why you would think that. Like a lot of times the Jedi are like deflecting blaster bolts back and they're killing droids, or or you play the video games, like deflecting blaster bolts often is like a main way that you attack your opponents. But in Legion, you're playing against a human who has complete control over their shots, and generally as you play against better and better players, they're going to learn when to shoot a force user with a shot that's going to do damage, that's going to be worth the potential of taking 1 wound on reflection, and when not to. And so generally leaving your force user out and giving your opponent time to spool up attacks or to have their best units at shooting force users engage them is not a good idea, and often leads to dead force users. Like when I play against new players, Luke comes out from behind a wall, he has surge to block, he holds up his lightsaber, he gets shot like 3 or 4 times, he does like 3 or 4 wounds, but he takes like 7 wounds and he dies. And that's just not a very good cost-effective thing. You should view deflect as a defensive ability that is a slight, like, it makes it feel a little less bad to get blasted by a ranged attack, but it is not something that lets you survive sustained ranged attacks for any force user, even the ones that have abilities that augment their deflect, like Darth Vader, Ahsoka. I don't know. Does anybody else have an augmented deflect ability right now?
Those are the only 2.
Yeah. So even characters that have like better deflects, generally, you just never want to leave them out to get shot multiple times. And so that means that you want them to either hide behind walls, or you want them to be given backup by your supporting units to really discourage that shot. Yeah, and certainly in heavy cover if they have to be exposed. You never want to expose your force user and try and, like, it's just not never, but super rare that baiting your opponent into shooting your most valuable unit that has a low wound count would pay off for you.
Also, I think, like, Blaise, you go.
Deflect is good, but the best defense is just not getting shot at all.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, to Blaise's point there, I think you're much better off instead of just deflecting a wound back. It's better to not get shot, make sure you're alive for when you are in melee swinging your lightsaber at people, because no matter what, you're going to do more wounds by surviving and getting like a lightsaber attack off than you are just like deflecting a blaster bolt back at like a clone trooper like mega squad, Yeah. So it's definitely like a bonus. It's a good defensive keyword, but it's not something you should ever build your strategy around. it's definitely like a trap.
One
Also-
and a good I think a proof of concept for that is there's a concept called effective hit points, which is basically the idea that you can use math to calculate on average how many hits it would take to defeat a unit. For a unit with red surging saves, it takes 3 hits on average to deal 1 wound, because if they roll 3 dice, 2 of them would be blocks and 1 of them would be a blank. So that means for any force user with deflect, you can essentially triple their wounds, and that's about how many hits it would take to kill them. So that's 18 hits for most of these force users. Many units in Legion can produce like 7-8 hits. So that should give you an idea of like, you really shouldn't be eating those attacks on your force users. Because literally one attack from, say, like a Black Sun or a Super Squad or anything could very easily tax you for half of your wounds or kill you. Like on average, it could take half your wounds, which is not something that like that. You did maybe 1 wound back to them.
It sets you up for failure later in the game, and I think one underrated aspect of Legion that I don't really feel gets talked about, but we've certainly talked about a lot as a group, is sometimes even when you're doing the math, and my brother who's a professional poker player will probably appreciate the concept, is sometimes you have to with the math you have to kind of prep yourself for, all right, well, what if the math doesn't work out? We'll have like 18 effective wounds, but if there's a reasonable chance, like, okay, like let's say there's a 25% chance it does, 6 effective.
It does 5 wounds and kills Ahsoka in 1 attack.
Yeah. So it's like, yes, on average, you're gonna be fine, but why take that risk if the end result is I lose?
Yeah. So you should. Yeah.
Like I'm gonna put Darth Vader. Yeah, I'll put Darth Vader out in the open. I only have to take 2 shots from like my enemy's like rebel trooper unit that's throwing like 4 dice a piece. On average, they're probably gonna get 4 hits through. But what if they spike? And what if my defense doesn't hold up? It's like you're thinking, oh, this is not a very threatening attack, but there is a chance that things go poorly. So don't put yourself in the situation unnecessarily, even if you have like pretty good defense. I think the only defense that feels like you can sometimes get away with that type of risk is things that take the math out of it, like we talked about in a previous podcast, where it's like, dodge tokens. You don't have to roll for it, you're just canceling hits. Backup. If you have heavy cover and low profile.
Get shot at all.
Line of sight blocking walls, or for me, my favorite, Obi-Wan with Cerezu, where it's like, still there's math, but I have 1 extra reroll just in case the math works out poorly for me on a roll. I at least get a mulligan. So force users can be very, very tanky. They certainly could spike on rolls where it feels like the opponent cannot get a wound in on them. But if you're building your list around their effectiveness, which most of the time if you're playing a force user you are, don't take unnecessary risks just because you think it would be like kind of cool. This is something Darth Vader would do.
And the other thing is that all force users except for Vader also can be suppressed. So even if you're not taking damage, if you're taking successive attacks, you're potentially losing actions on a very expensive unit. It's just, I mean, obviously you're going to get shot sometimes, but always be evaluating, can I either delay my activation to eat less attacks when I get into position by waiting for those units to go? Can I hide behind a wall, or can I use dodge tokens and other defensive tech to really minimize the damage I'm going to take? Don't depend on deflect. A good opponent is not going to be dissuaded by deflect, and they're also going to punch through. Generally, they're going to punch through.
Also, like, red saves are kind of like, I wouldn't rely too, like, they are very tanky in theory, like Jacob was saying, with all the numbers, but I mean, it's a dice variance game.
I think they're really not tanky when you compare them to investing the same points. Like a stormtrooper with like a heavy costs like 60 points and has 5 red save wounds. You pay like 175 points for Anakin, and he has 6 surging red saves. Like, their defenses are not that great. What you're getting is a unit that doesn't attrition at all. So that means if Anakin takes 5 wounds, he does as much damage as he did when he had full health, or sometimes more if he's tenacity. Versus a stormtrooper that takes 4 wounds is pretty much worthless offensively, which is big. And then you get crazy abilities, which we might talk more about. I don't know how much we'll go into every unit. Okay, so that's really important if you're a new player. Another way that you can hide, and this comes up a lot, is you're probably aware, but trooper units in Legion, when they're engaged with each other, you cannot be shot. Which means that if your force user is in melee, they can't get attacked by surrounding range units. Other guys would have to pile into the melee to attack them, which is generally what a force user wants, is more guys in melee with it, more people to swing with. And so if you're looking for a way to get safely to a position, you can essentially treat an enemy unit that's activated as a line of sight blocker for your force user. Because if there's like an enemy B1 battle droid that has moved onto an objective and activated, and so I know exactly where it is. This is changing all the time, but it generally can't move, and there isn't a way for it to move once I gauge it. We'll ignore overclock for now. That means that if I have a force user and I can get into melee with that B1, I can hide on that objective in melee with that B1 and can't get shot by anything.
Plus,
essentially, my opponent has given me a line of sight blocker that I can hide within that melee. And that's like a fundamental play that when you see people who know what they're doing with force users, they're going to wait for you to come up with something, and they're often going to engage it at some point, and then they're going to try and ping pong between units. Like, they're going to be hiding in melee. And that's how you get like the really cool like Star Wars experience of like the force user bouncing, like killing tons of stormtroopers. And in Legion, the way that you achieve that is by going into melee, swinging at a unit, and then moving into another unit and just keeping them all tied up.
And like the more that there is of the unit left, the more it's actually favoring the Jedi. So if the B1s have a heavy and extra personnel, it's like 8 dudes, he can just bubble wrap himself in it. And then in a way that no one else can enter the melee except for that person, except for the B1 with the heavy and a specialist or whatever. So it's another way for you kind of, it's a safeguard. It's like, oh, there's like Dooku going to come in there, but he has a force push in this scenario. He can just force push Anakin out. He's just being surrounded by B1s.
I think we might save that for like we might talk about that in like the playing against force users thing. But yeah, the fundamental idea of hiding yourself in an activated enemy unit. The reason that you want it to be activated is if it's unactivated, that unit can withdraw with an action. That still forces that unit not to attack, which is good. You are forcing a unit not to attack. But if you run into that B1 and it can still use its 2 actions, it can just walk out of the melee and your force user is stuck and will get shot a lot. So generally you want to look for activated units, at least in the early rounds. That's kind of often your in. That's like your breakthrough point. Is like, okay, finally, like on round 1, maybe round 2, I got into position. And then round 3, an enemy unit comes forward to play the objective, and I can dive into that unit once it's done activating. And then I have sort of a staging point where I can get out into maybe better targets. If you're lucky, your opponent came up with like a Death Trooper or something high value that you can swing at, but maybe it's just a B1. But often you want to take that and get into an aggressive position.
And also just another nuance for like hiding if you're playing as a force user and wanting to hide him, terrain can very often be your friend. So if you ever have the option to like be hugging like a wall where there's fewer areas where another model can get into base contact with you, it's much easier to hide in melee, where, you know, typically I think on average it's like if you, like 4 or 5 models can be touching another model's base. But if you're like, if half your model is essentially being cut off by like a straight wall, then all of a sudden it's only one unit's going to be able to fit into melee with you, or maybe like 2 units at most. So it's just, there's a lot of nuances to like hiding yourself in melee. It's just, you don't want your force user to take unnecessary shots, because at the end of the day, like Paul is indicating, even though they have like really solid saves, at the end of the day, like 6 wounds, 5 or 6 wounds on average is not a lot. It's not a lot of cushion. And if your entire game plan is revolving around your force user doing like some crazy thing on round 3 and 4, you don't want them to take any like easy cheap shots that were avoidable in the lead up to like when you're trying to make your big plays.
And then an important thing to remember is Pierce is optional. So every force user has a Pierce weapon. When your opponent makes defensive rolls, you can choose how much of your Pierce value to spend. So, for example, Anakin swings at a Stormtrooper. Stormtrooper has 5 wounds. Your opponent rolls 2 blocks. You've pierced 3. If you kill all 5 of those Stormtroopers, you have then exposed Anakin because you've deleted the unit. He is not engaged anymore and he can be shot. So sometimes it might be worth it to only pierce 1 or 2 blocks to leave a mini alive. You have to remember that miniature is going to then still be around in the next round. It's going to count for objectives, and it's going to be tying you up. But sometimes, if you roll way better than you expected, and you're like, oh no, if I kill this unit, I'm exposed to 3 black sun shots, and I'm probably losing my force user. It's probably worth it to leave a model alive and keep your force user alive. So that's really key. Doesn't come up super often, but when it does, it's really important to know.
I think it's important for when you want to use a specific command card, especially if you're going you're going last of Anakin or whoever, and you want to get into that fight and you want to play a command card the next turn that can help augment his attack the next time. You don't want to keep him out there, or whatever. You don't want to keep him out. So I think being able to choose when and how to kill a whole unit is a nice kind of also safety barrier, so you're not gonna overkill a Stormtrooper in case you don't want to.
And if you paid for force choke or force push, then it's even better. But that's specific to a couple of units. And then last thing that's sort of generic, applies to every force user, I think, would be deployment and then positioning in the early rounds in terms of when you deploy your force user. I think for pretty much all of them, you would like to deploy them last, or at least activate them last, or near the end of the first round. And the reason for that is because you don't want your opponent to know where your force user is going, and you don't want to commit to where your force user is going until you see where your enemy's units are going. Force users generally don't have any real ranged threat. They certainly don't have any range attacks beyond range 2. So if a force user gets isolated on a flank or it doesn't have a lot of targets, it's going to be pretty hard for them to migrate to the other side of the board and participate in a major fight. So if you say you double move Anakin out on an early round and you have a line of sight blocker and you're okay, he's safe, and then your opponent could choose to essentially just vacate that area of the board and say okay, your 200-point Anakin is over here, and I'm going to try and beat you on these objectives over here. Now Anakin's got to either run over here or he's got to sit on this objective for the rest of the game and not really produce any value. So generally you want to wait and see how the board state develops on the first turn to get your force users in a good position.
Typically, the command cards you're playing either give an order to the force user, or you're playing something orders, or giving it to the force user, or you have some way to make your bag be able to resort it if you pick them by accident, or you have multiple copies. Because it feels real bad to have a 200-point unit go up against just a single Stormtrooper, and it doesn't get its value out, and you have a lot of good command cards that you want to play, but they're not useful on this flank because it's just one.
Yeah, and you want order control. That's another thing. You want order control on almost every force user. Either sometimes you can do it just through sorting your bag well, but generally just giving them an order and controlling when they go. That's huge in every round, not just on round 1. Just being able to control these big pieces when they go off.
If you're playing like a multiple hero units, and you have force users that are extremely timing sensitive, that you really need them to do the thing, that's where improvised orders comes in. That's where trusted agent as a command slot upgrade to just give like once during the game a free order to your force user that's an operative, like many of them are, or seize the initiative as a training upgrade as a one-time face-up order. There's a lot of ways around like order control for even in like a faction like Rebels where order control is difficult, where you should never really be risking your force user not having order control on it, because that could just be a disaster where you're eating 5 black sun shots before you, well, in reality you'd probably survive like maybe two or three at most, but where you're just like out of luck with one of your with something worth a fifth of your list's points.
And then the last positioning thing, the last generic thing at least, I think to talk about is just the fundamentals of pre-measuring a force user. So most force users are speed 2, and generally they have charge, so they can make an attack after engaging an enemy unit. If you did not know, a speed 1 move or speed 2 move on a trooper base, the small trooper base, is a range 1 ruler. So, yeah, Anthony, that's like the standard base that most trooper units have. And then this is a range 1. And then, so if you move twice on your turn, take 2 actions, you can move range 2. And that's generally going to be the threat range to do a lightsaber attack with most force users. If your force user doesn't have charge, or if they're speed 1, either because of an immobilized token or because they're Yoda or Vader, then it's a little different. And if you have burst of speed, it extends an extra 2/3. But generally, this is where you want to put your unit. So you want to put your force user range 2, generally of an objective, of an enemy unit you want to charge, or a spot where you think your opponent is going to go, so that if they come there, you can charge them. So that's really important. And remember that most force users have jump, so if your force user has jump, you can put yourself right up against a wall and jump over the wall, making you even safer and giving you a movement option that most other units don't have. So yeah, definitely use that. If you have burst of speed, learn that it's 2 and 2/3, right?
I think it's 2.5.
Burst. So it's 2 and 2/3. Or Blaze?
Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Yeah,
Two,
so
2/3.
Yeah, learn the threat range of your force user and try and get them into a position on turn 1 where you can threaten either enemy units immediately or where you think your opponent's going to go. Because you're probably going to activate later, and basically you can say, hey, if you walk that Death Trooper up to play this objective, he's going to get smacked by Luke's lightsaber, and that's going to suck. Yeah, so those are like generic ways to play force users. You want to keep them alive, you want to get them in a position where they can have good target selection, they can get on objectives and flip objectives that might have otherwise gone to your opponent. And you want to hide yourself in melee with enemy units. That's really how you get these cool games where force users tear apart entire armies or win the game single-handedly, is through using those techniques and then layering on the really good command card and unit upgrades that are unique to different characters.
And they could be augmented further with force powers, which we can talk about a little bit. So I think force powers depend on like each of the Jedi or Sith that you're playing as. But I think for a general consensus, I think from at least most people play force users, I think burst is a must pick for most Jedi that want to get in there, start fighting. Thinking Anakin, Dooku, Vader, they want to get in that fight, and that speed augment helps them, as well as command cards that like let them swing twice, augment their attack. So I think that's kind of almost a staple that you want to put onto most force users if you can afford the 10 points. Another good upgrade I think is push, but that is dependent on what you think is going to be effective with that push on that character. I think Master of the Force 1, if you don't have that you're going to be recovering each time. But in general, push is expensive, and I think having a plan of what you want to do with it makes it really good. But I think you want to go in with some sort of idea of like, all right, Yoda has Master Force 2. He's going to be in there slicing, but he doesn't want to get trapped with a bunch of like B1s. So I'm going to have push in case he gets trapped in a big melee he doesn't want to be in.
Yeah, I think with burst and push, they're like probably the most. Yeah, they're the most common force upgrades, and yeah, you generally you want a reason to use it, but yeah, a way to think of burst is in a game, burst may make the difference between swinging your lightsaber and not swinging your lightsaber on one round, which is pretty big when you look at the value of these attacks. Push, it really depends on the unit. If a unit wants push, they generally have Master of the Force to refresh it because it's very expensive. And generally they're a unit that is already expensive and they want to have good target selection. But the other force upgrades, just like to any other force upgrade, you generally have a specific reason on that unit that effect would be extra useful. So like Jedi Mind Trick is pretty much only played on Yoda right now because Yoda can it combos very nicely with suppressive on his weapon. So it's good in that matchup. It might be decent on Operative Luke. You used to see some play, but that card has changed, so maybe not. But Jedi Mind Trick is probably not a great take on like Anakin or Obi-Wan because they don't have any other mechanic that either puts suppression on. And it's the same with reflexes. You generally force reflexes is a really common like beginner pick for your force users, but generally you want to leave it for the characters that get some extra value out of a dodge token like Ahsoka or Inquisitors. Somebody who needs that dodge token for their core abilities to function. The ones that I would generally avoid are the suppression and inspire ones. There's 2 force upgrades, Tranquility and Hope, and then there's Terror and Fear, which are the dark side equivalents. Like the Fear and Hope, if you get value out of them, they're fine. They just don't align with what force users generally want to do. They're kind of like low impact passive abilities, and force users generally want to have fairly effective swingy activations, and putting out 1 suppression or taking off 1 or 2 suppression off a friendly unit just often isn't like gonna pay off in a game. And you're limited on your slots on these units. If you had like 5 force user slots, maybe, or 4 slots, but most force users are having 1 or 2.
Yeah, and that's like, we talked earlier about a lot of the things that make force users unique. I mean, that is the biggest thing that makes them unique is they're, those force upgrades. You don't in the old rules, you just kind of stapled force push on them because force push is such an impactful card. These days, it's 35 points more expensive than it used to be, so it's kind of you need to maximize its value. Like Paul is sort of and Tony have said, is you need those force slots are what make them valuable. You need to have a plan and a reason why you're taking those like specific force upgrades. And I think a lot of the force upgrades are either like mediocre or not very good or don't really feel impactful. I think most, besides Burst of Speed, which is just like universally allows force users to get attacks off or score objectives that they would not be able to otherwise, virtually every other force upgrade that you would take is for a reason. Like you take a lot of time you take Force Barrier on Obi-Wan because Obi-Wan's already like guardianing your army and protecting them, and Barrier just like is like an accent to that value. Or like Paul was saying with Jedi Mind Trick on Yoda, like Yoda has the ability to do his Force Wave attack that puts suppression on, and so you could do that and Jedi Mind Trick, and then all of a sudden a unit goes from 0 suppression to 4, and in many cases they're panicking or at the very least suppressed. So you always need a plan with those force upgrades.
And they're generally worth taking. I mean, sometimes you don't have to, but you're not going to be upset if you take a force upgrade that is in line with what your character wants, what tokens or what abilities that would be helpful, which is good. Yeah, and one thing I do want to say, and this is sort of something I've been thinking about. So this is more hypothetical, but one of the logical reasons to bring Force Push is because it allows you to sort of have more influence over who you're swinging your lights hit at. You can Force Push an enemy unit like out of melee with you and go and attack a different enemy unit. I think that logic is like flawed in the new game. I think that's like not really accurate, just because of how expensive Force Push is. By taking Force Push, you make that unit 40 points more expensive than it would be, like an entire activation more expensive than it would be. So it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if I take Force Push on Anakin with the intention of, I'm going to use this so I can Force Push B1s out of melee with Anakin so I can attack higher value targets. But you've just made Anakin 40 points more expensive than he would have been. So, yes, you need that, but if he was 40 points less, you might be more comfortable with swinging at a lower value target and just annihilating a different unit. That doesn't mean don't take Force Push, but I think you need to have a plan to use Force Push that goes beyond just, like, attacking high-value targets or being like, my opponent might have to take one more unit to tie me down in melee, which in the old rules it was used a lot for, because it was cheap. You were like, I'll just throw these B1s out of melee and go after these red save units. I think the new price point has really changed that. It really needs to be like flipping objectives in your favor or pulling units really out of position. It's not just like like basically it was being used as like discount disengage for a long time. Yeah. So our next topic is playing against Force users. A couple of these things are like playing the duel. We talk like a little bit of like dueling an enemy Force user. We might want to wait on that until we sort of talk about the general stuff. I don't know what people think.
Yeah, I think we can talk about the general stuff before we talk about whether or not you want to go toe-to-toe with Force user if you're a Force user. But I think if you're playing against a Force user in general, I think having in your list impacting units that can either tie it down or shut it down completely with like large dice pools in melee, I think that's like a very preferable way that most people go about it. I think people arcs, sleeper cell, non-inquisitors, someone better than that.
Yeah. So
there's a few ways to, I think, counter Force users, and again, every Force user is different. But if we're talking like a run-of-the-mill beat stick Force user, that is certainly the centerpiece of your opponent's army. One is just trying to run away and avoid it, which is sometimes, like we talked about at the beginning, if someone deploys them early, either through mistake or through a bad draw from their bag.
Which is also a mistake. If you draw Vader out of your bag on turn 1 and have to deploy him, that's a mistake.
That's an unforced error.
That's not just bad luck. That's like he should have had an order. To be clear.
But if that were to happen, and or like if Anakin uses prepared positions, and you're playing like breakthrough or something, and your opponent just doesn't have a lot of experience and should probably know, hey, I should avoid using prepared positions in this particular scenario. Sometimes it is better to just run away and just sort of out-deploy your opponent. But the more realistic way, like if you're playing like a very or a more experienced opponent with playing Force user, is especially if they do not have Force Push, you can charge like low-value units that are maybe a little tough to kill to charge into your enemy Force user. And I think the two that really come to mind, one is the one that Paul has been using as an example, is B1s. Super easy to kill, but they have a lot of wounds. At baseline they have 6 wounds, and even the strongest Force users are typically throwing 6 dice maximum. And if they don't roll perfectly, they might kill 5 wounds off the B1s extremely easily, but there'll still be like 1 left to keep them locked down. And the other that I think I have more experience pushing into people in the new rules is like double moving a rebel trooper unit into melee, which is effectively the same thing with 4 wounds and 2 dodges.
Yep. So that's one strategy, is essentially throwing cheap units into the force user.
Yeah,
Slob.
Feed them slob. Spend 2 turns killing my 40-point rebel trooper unit.
Yep. In front of them or into melee with them before they can get to high-value targets. And when you're doing that, you're essentially saying, I have no plan to kill this force user. Like, rebel troopers and B1s are not going to kill force user. You're actually hiding your opponent's force user from your shooting units. But I think that if I delay them long enough with cheap units, I will win the rest of the board. So that's like, you make that decision when you're like, I'm winning everywhere else. Maybe my opponent was invested in this force user and they need this force user to be killing my high value shooting units. And if I keep this guy tied up, then my death troopers, my special forces, my arc troopers can go to town on the rest of my opponent's list. It's not really a decision that you want to make when you're like behind. When you're like, if I don't kill this force user, like I need to kill this force user actually. You're essentially locking yourself out of killing them in exchange for giving your opponent worse targets.
There has to be a reason that you're delaying it. Yeah. And yeah, again, if you're sending your 40-point unit into the enemy's, 150 plus point force user, theoretically, it's because you have a really good chance that if I could hold off this force user for 1 or 2 turns, my units outmatch my opponent's units. Yeah. And Paul, what would you say if feeding units and you're behind, or if you're a Republic player and you don't have any cheap units to throw to feed your enemy's force user? What do you think is the best strategy?
So, and I think we're imagining a scenario implicitly where you don't. So there's 2 ways, I guess. First, I'm imagining a scenario where you don't have a lot of melee threats. Like, you don't think that you can bludgeon the force user to death. What I want to do, and I did this to you, Jacob, the other day, is you want to come out strong and hit that force user on turn 1 and turn 2 and chip health off of them. You want to whittle them down and make them killable. So, like, Obi-Wan's probably a pretty bad example of why you do this. Anakin was the game that we played. Anakin has 6 wounds, red saves, deflect. And if I don't have a melee threat, my counter is to shoot him in the face on turn 1 and turn 2. So you're going to try and maybe sell out a little bit to get these shots and be like, if I can invest and get 2, 3, 4 wounds would be nice in the first 2 rounds, then suddenly he's killable by anything. Then suddenly your chaff units can actually kill him. With a punch. Like, 1 good punch from a stormtrooper could kill Anakin when he has 2 wounds. 2 good punches could kill him. It's never going to happen when he has 6. So, yeah, if you look at your opponent's list, you're like, oh crap, they've got this force user, and I don't have anything. Which you when you made that list, you knew that this was the risk of playing your shooting list. Was that enemy melee units, I'm not going to have an answer to them. So you need to figure out a way to shoot them on turn 1. Means that you probably need to, not turn 1 or turn 2. You either need to have things with big threat ranges that keep them pushed back against the board or can find them by flanking around line of sight blockers. You have to have strong attacks that can punch through backup and heavy cover, or you have to have a way to put suppression out to remove backup. And then you're going to try and chip the damage. And you shouldn't be upset if you don't kill the force user. The goal is not to kill them. The goal is to bring them into a wound count where they are killable in the later stages of the game, either by 1 lucky ranged attack that comes out because of the sequencing of the turns, or from chip damage from units, from chaff units, your core units and stuff, punching them in melee.
Or you think that you could really... you have a big power piece, ATST, land speeder, AAT, that can really punch a force user from long range, and you can get them out of place. that big tank or vehicle is also going to be able to
Yeah.
make them think like, oh, I can't just charge into this guy because I'm going to get shot in the face by high velocity rounds,
Yep.
and there's things behind the tank that are guarding it, and it's like so.
Yep.
You could. There's like multiple ways, like Paul and Jacob were saying. You could like kind of plink them to where they're a bit more wounded, or just kind of concentrate fire with like your big things onto them.
Yeah, the list Paul was talking about is like he had quite a bit of long-range firepower. He had some high-velocity sniper units that were able to sort of peek around corners to shoot at Anakin, or he was playing like an Iden.
I was playing Iden Tac Strike, and I had. So Iden Tac Strike is Iden Versio, Imperial, and a bunch of Imperial Special Forces units, and they use her Tac Strike card to get steady on top of Infiltrate. So they have a lot of, they can find targets on turn 1.
He was able to put a lot of, and ended up like being very aggressive and risk those units, but by putting a bunch of wounds onto Anakin early, even if I was able to punch back with some of my like longer range units, like a 5 Z6 squad, or even like an ARC squad that was able to reach his targets. In the end, if my list is built around a Force user doing the thing, like this particular list was, by putting that many wounds into Anakin round 1, the subsequent rounds he was able to find those chip damage, and Anakin was dead by the end of round 2 after like taking a couple of smaller melee attacks.
Yeah. And in that game, like I got a little lucky on the punches on Anakin, but I think the principle was there. Like even if I didn't kill Anakin on turn 2, I probably could have brought him down on turn 3 just through like punching him with what I had. Like you said, like if your opponent brought a Force user, the rest of their list might look scary, but theoretically, like you also play 1,000-point list. Like your opponent, and that Force user generally, and I think Obi-Wan is the big exception to this, is not going to produce a lot of value if they are not engaged in melee fairly quickly. So even like if Anthony said, if you're just zoning them and creating an area where they can't go to, if you're delaying them getting into your army, then you're also winning. So that's how I would play that. And then what happens is you scale that back the more melee units you have. If I have a couple of melee units, then suddenly I need to do less wounds to Anakin, and then I can use these melee units. I just need to keep them in a position where they can countercharge, and then eventually it gets to the point where like that it's like this scale of how much do I need to chip the Force user to kill them, and how much melee do I need how much melee do I have is bringing the chip damage down, and eventually you might just be like, I don't even need to shoot him at all. I'm just going to beat him to death if he comes into my army. That's pretty rare, but if you have like a crazy melee skew list, then you might just try and dogpile that Force user when they come in.
Yep, like Republic ARC Troopers are like the big example of like they hit incredibly hard in melee with like big dice pools. They're like a Force user's worst nightmare. When the Force user swings back, like it obviously do some pretty big damage back to the ARCs. The ARCs are likely not living in that engagement for very long. But if you can charge from across the board with a range to melee threat range backed up by a couple of aims, like you're often getting like 8 hits through on the Force user, and on average, if they do not surge to block naturally, which most Force users don't in melee, they're taking 4 wounds on average, and that's just that's horrendous. And if they have even a slightly below average roll, like you're possibly even one-shotting that Force user. So it's if you have a melee skew, that it opens up some options, and you just kind of have to understand when you're building a list. Like I think every list in the game, and we may have talked about this on a previous podcast when we were talking about tournament prep, you always need to have a plan with how to deal with Force users. Whatever that plan is, you need to have a plan because you are going to play against Force users in a Star Wars game.
And I think going back to your advice for the Force user, if your opponent has a handful of units that are melee units that are going to be a threat, you should look to kill those units or otherwise prevent them from being that threat. And that's like where you capitalize on some of the advantages that Force users have over multi-model units. Generally, multi-model units have lower courage. They're going to get suppressed easily. So an ARC Trooper is only courage 2. Republic doesn't have like compel access. So if you can get 2 suppression on that ARC Trooper, there's a chance that they don't get the double move. If you get 3 on average, they don't get the double move. If you get more than that, then it's fairly unlikely, and that halves the charge range. And so suddenly these ARC Troopers that might have been positioned sort of in the middle of your opponent's army can't reach certain points, or only one of them can reach a point. And the other thing is that your Force User has Pierce, and most of those units don't have immune melee Pierce. Some of them do. We might talk about them a little bit, but if they don't have immune Pierce, then you can try and go first and kill the multiple models off to shave a bunch of dice off that attack. Like an ARC Trooper at full health, double moving and charging, rolling 10 hits is terrifying. An ARC Trooper that's taken 1 swing from a Force User and lost like 3 models is not so scary anymore. So you want to juggle. If I'm in melee with like 2 ARC Trooper units, I probably want to go first with my Force User and try and kill one of those ARC Troopers. Or play a card that lets me, like, a lot of times if people try and dogpile Dooku, for example, I play as 1 pip and I try and force lightning and like lightsaber swing both ARC Troopers and just whittle them all the way down. That's like an example of how you deal with that situation. Yeah. And when you're against a Force User, and this goes in both directions, you want to have an idea before the game starts of what your opponent is looking to do with that Force User. Generally, like, they're going to have a target of like, hey, that's a unit I would like to be in melee with. And generally, your units that are not immune pierce and have red saves are going to be the units that they're going to be aiming to hit, because they want to get the maximum value out of the pierce value on their lightsaber. And they want to kill high cost units. So they want to be targeting your special forces. They want to be targeting your commanders that don't have immune pierce. So when you're investing in defenses, you should be trying to defend. Like when you're positioning your whatever you're going to defend against a Force User, you should be trying to cover those parts of your army more than you're, say, covering like vehicles. Like vehicles are not a great target for Force Users, generally, because armor will shave off a bunch of their hits. So yeah, that's the other thing is, like, as you're deploying in turn 1, know where your opponent's probably going to end up and put your counters there.
I think that's, and again, there's always nuances to each individual Force User. I think like support Force Users are a little harder to counter because they're less one note. It's like they're often doing stuff for the enemy's army, beyond just like getting in and swinging, like Paul talked about earlier. My favorite Force User, Obi-Wan, it's like he's no slouch in melee, but that's not where he's getting the majority of his value. Or some of these like finesse pieces like Yoda. Yoda, he could put some turd on when he needs to, but he could also do some like force shenanigans and support the army perhaps a little bit less than Obi-Wan, but most Force Users, broadly speaking, at some point in the game, or the majority of their value is going to come from their ability to both shave off attacks and put on a lot of hurt to your to the opponent. So having a plan to deal with that one way or another, and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your list are pretty big to dealing with Force Users, whether you have a Force User in your list or not. So I think we could probably talk about what to do, when it looks like my Force User
what to do in a duel situation.
Which happens.
It happens a lot. Like, I think any game of Star Wars Legion where there's Force Users on both sides of the board, there is a strong magnetism for there to be a duel of the Force Users, both because that's what Star Wars is largely, like, the most epic moments in the media, and also, like, you have these two units that are powerful melee units. So they generally, on paper and in practice, can counter each other. And every Force User has all these command cards with crazy abilities, so oftentimes they're trying to... there's gonna be Force User duels. It happens a lot. And it's funny, the conventional wisdom, and I don't know, I do think this is a little bit not true broadly, but the conventional wisdom is actually to avoid the duel with Force Users. And the reasoning behind that is usually that all Force users are immune pierce. And therefore, if you're swinging your lightsaber at an enemy Force user, you're not getting value out of your pierce. I think that's really just too simplistic and too like spreadsheet oriented to actually be applicable in real Legion games. Like, sure, Anakin might be getting more value out of his keywords if he's swinging at a stormtrooper, but generally, like killing Count Dooku or killing an enemy Darth Vader, if that's even possible, enemy Luke, whatever. Killing an enemy Force user is going to be like a huge swing in the momentum of the game. So oftentimes it makes sense to duel. Is my opinion.
I agree with you, and sometimes the efficiency game could be a bit of a trap. You also have to keep in mind, it's like, yes, if my high power Force user is getting trapped in melee with my enemy's Force user, it's not killing a bunch of, high value red save units.
Yeah.
However, my Force user is probably the only thing that is going to survive a couple of hits from his Force user. And it's sort of like...
And their Force user is not swinging at your unit.
Exactly. So it kind of like... You have to do a little bit of mental math, not just in like can my Force user win the duel? Because sometimes you're going to go into a duel with the understanding I'm not likely to win this duel, but it's holding off my opponent long enough for my army to do the thing. I think that's something that Inquisitors are kind of built to do, of just like these really cheap, tough to kill, Force users because they have in melee because they have the block keyword. So if they spend a dodge, they have surge to block, which is in some ways a better keyword for dueling than deflect is. So I think outside of the math of like, can I win this duel? It's, does me being stuck in melee with does our two Force users being stuck in melee ultimately benefit me more with the rest of my army and what I'm doing with these objectives, or benefit them more? And that has to kind of go into the math, and part of that math is his Force user like more important to his offensive combat? So it's like, I think, let's say I'll always use Obi-Wan as an example because I play a lot of Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's value does not ultimately come from him doing a lot of damage to my opponent. If I've already supported my army the first 3 rounds, I do not mind being stuck in melee with my opponent. Because it means, if I'm in melee with Darth Vader for, the rest of the game, that's fine to me, because he's not chopping away at my ARC troopers, and his value of chopping away at my ARC troopers is way higher value than me chopping into like his stormtroopers.
I think another thing is that even though I guess I'm generally supportive of dueling your Force users. If you have command cards and stuff that you think can give you a leg up in the duel, and we can talk a little bit about evaluating that. But you shouldn't chase the duel usually. You shouldn't like just have your Force user like running around and not going after enemy targets that are like viable targets or winning objectives to like beeline across the board to get to the enemy Force user. You generally want to be hitting units on the way there, or going into an enemy and forcing your opponent to come up to you and duel you. And like, so I will say that, like, even with Count Dooku, who is like sort of designed to duel enemy Force users, I'm not just going to randomly double move him across the board with the investment of killing an enemy Force user. If my opponent's given me valuable targets and they decided to walk over there, usually I'm going to try and get value here before I go after an enemy Force user.
I think I'm in the camp where I'm trying. If they force a duel onto me, great. But I think I'm in the camp where I'm trying to get them to get stuck in melee with a unit of mine that I think can survive. But I want my Force user to go about and do their things. I think if they're stuck just whacking against ARC troopers, whatever, Anakin can go off and like do his own thing. Because I see your guys' point, but I think I'm in that camp of having the Force user do its own thing, because I think that's where a lot of their value comes out of.
And you've been playing Anakin a decent amount, right?
No, I've been playing Obi-Wan.
Anakin and Yoda.
Or like, yeah, I think like Yoda specifically. I want like
Yeah.
Yoda to be going around, jumping around, swinging his lightsaber like in the movies, and like have the ARC troopers like fight Dooku, keep him tied up, and like not have to worry about him. I'm gonna lose those ARC troopers, but it's gonna be a slower grind than if I'm gonna deal with like him and Yoda.
I think Yoda might be uniquely not great at dueling enemy Force users because he doesn't really have his lightsaber is hyper efficient. You know, with the 4 red, surge to crit, pierce 2, but it's ultimately not a lot of dice. And
Yeah, if he's
opposing
not double swinging, it's a significantly less than any other force user.
and then he's playing like a lot of the suppression game. Some of his command cards are not really none of his command cards are really about putting out extra damage, whereas I think you have like Anakin, who his entire purpose is to like kill the opponent. I think you're getting a lot of value of having Yoda kind of messing around with enemy core units, irrespective of whether he's swinging or not. And I also think because he's got a lower wound threshold of 5, he's more susceptible to like those bad, potentially worst case scenarios getting one shot. I mean, I remember the one game I had against Tony a few years ago where I literally got 5 hits through and one shot Yoda, which obviously statistically improbable, but more probable than any other Force user, essentially.
Yeah, for many Force users, any 6 wound Force user is generally in like this camp where it's unlikely, sometimes impossible, for them to be killed by a single lightsaber swing. The 5 wound Force users are in a camp where there are many ways to kill them in one attack, just through the fact that they don't have enough raw wounds.
I don't think there's
Blaise,
any wrong answer.
Blaise, you play a lot of Vader. What is your opinions on Vader as a duel? Like, do you take duels? Because Vader also is weird because he's kind of the only Force user other than Inquisitors in Empire.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it depends on the Force user you're going up against. Like, if I'm playing against a Force user with Nakashi, definitely not. Just because the odds of Vader winning that duel and just the overall like length of the duel is gonna be way shorter than I feel is worthwhile. Yeah, but yeah, like you said, if I'm going up against a 5 wound Force user or even a 6 wound, yeah, I'd probably take that duel over just to bind up your opponent's Force user. Yeah.
Vader is pretty slow. Both versions of Vader are pretty slow. So if your opponent is giving you a high value target, even if you can't use his pierce, you can swing at something. And if you win the duel, and Vader isn't super likely to lose duels. It's more that he can take too long.
Yeah.
Because both versions of, to be clear, because the health. Because Vader at baseline, Commander Vader has 8 wounds, which is the highest of any Force user, and Operative Vader has 7 wounds, which is tied for the second highest.
Surge access too.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I think again, there's no one way to do it. I think generally, like a lower value Force user, like an Inquisitor, is much happier being stuck in melee. It has a small dice pool, Pierce 1, versus like a Darth Vader, which is, rolling bigger attacks with Pierce 3, loves to just murder, high value targets. So there is like a middle ground. I think a lot of the time you'll see like those middle of the road Force users, there's a little bit more in the decision making process. Like I'll take Rebel Ahsoka for example. A lot of times she actually really does like to be in duels because she has great dodge access. So getting a lot of dodges on smaller dice pools often means she's taken like maybe 1 or 2 wounds max. And then on the other end, if she's doesn't roll great, she, with her Jarkai mastery, she could spend those dodges to improve her dice results. So she's just very flexible on the duel, whether you need her dodges on defense or on offense. So she has a little bit more flexibility in that way. I think Operative Luke has some flexibility in that way because he has a high wound count. He'll often have Into the Fray, so he's getting, Surge to block. And then his offense is, it's a little inconsistent, but it's one of the higher dice pools for lightsabers. So
I think
there's a lot of math that goes into it, a lot of situations. But
I think if we were gonna like try and categorize it, I think there are a couple traits of Force users that make them good at duels, and you kind of talked about it with Ahsoka. But one of them would be if that Force user has the ability to put out a high amount of hits. Not really damage. It's generally a large number of hits in a single activation. Typically through a command card. Some Force users can just do this all the time, like Anakin and Vader just have really big dice, like strong red dice pools. Dooku has a strong red dice pool with Makashi, but like a Force user like Inquisitors or Obi-Wan that tend to not roll a lot of hits and don't really have cards that make them roll a lot of hits. That's not like super great for dueling. They might have other advantages. So that's one thing. Is like if your Force user, if they have a card up or in your hand that you could use to like put a bunch of hits out, that's solid. Solid thing to use in a duel. Try and nuke your opponent down with the weight of dice. And then on the vice versa, if they have strong defense, usually through having high wound counts and surge to block, that will make them good because your opponent can't pierce your dice rolls. So it really, your defense is entirely dependent on either your access to dodge tokens or on your access or on the quality of your saves. So that helps Dooku again. That's part of why Dooku is like the strongest duelist, is not just that he is Makashi, but also because he's really hard to get land a wound on. And it also helps any Force user with training slots that they can take Into the Fray on. Particularly the Force users with double training slots where they can take Into the Fray and Tenacity. And that's what you see on a lot of those units, like Operative Darth Vader, Anakin, Ahsoka, anybody with those with Darth Maul in CIS. And then lastly, it's kind of isolated to just a few units. If you can cut through enemy dodge tokens, that's also good. Common play to try and win a duel is to stack a bunch of tokens. It's really just like Darth Maul and then the Jar Kai users with their ability to produce crits that do that. I'm trying to think of, is there any other Force user that has some form of high velocity or stripping tokens?
The high velocity is only if you're running like the generic Jedi with the double lightsaber, right, which is not very good because it doesn't produce a lot of hits on average, but in that very specific scenario where you're going up against like another Force user that's relying on dodges for defense, it's pretty interesting.
So those abilities are all really useful in duels, and that's where you see them. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because thematically the big card that does that is Duel of the Fates. So maybe that card is really good in duels, obviously, thematically.
Especially against, ironically, it's great against Obi-Wan, which feels bad because Obi-Wan wins the Duel of the Fates, and it's really good against Ahsoka, who frickin' punks Maul in the Clone Wars. Yeah. So those are the two Force users it's the best against, and it is not super duper thematic.
Well, he kind of loses against everyone. I mean,
that is kind of his job, yeah.
Fair,
Darth Maul does lose against everybody.
Against General Grievous.
Wait, he does?
In a comic book, he loses. In a canonical comic book, he loses.
Bro, he loses to Grievous? Oh, yeah. Man. Maul's the eternal loser. Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
Sorry, Mark. Just the facts. Yeah, so those are all good reasons to take a duel. Other reason to take a duel is because it looks really cool on the table. And the nice thing about a duel, if you're playing a game of Legion, maybe not super competitively minded, is it often just makes the decision of the game, the crux of the game, become a dice fest. And like who can play the best command cards and read what it's a really interesting scenario to be in that isn't always the same as the rest of the game, where it's like you're trying to read what cards your opponent's going to play and play one of your cards that might counter it. And also, like, if you roll a clutch save and just block all your opponent's damage, you might just win the game because of how much value is tied up in that fight. Oftentimes, you have, like, 300, 400 points in combined units all participating, which is really fun.
It is fun. It is some of the most fun situations in Legion. Like one of my recent games against Mark, it basically came down to, all right, Mark is going to play one of two cards here for my Yoda versus Maul duel. If he plays one of those cards and goes with one line of conventional wisdom, I think I'm winning the duel. If he plays the other cards, if he plays the other card, I think I'm losing the duel. And he played the one that he should have played, and he ended up.
And he took like 5 minutes to think.
Yeah.
About. Because he was also trying to read you. Yeah, it's really cool. The duels just mechanically take such good advantage of all of the cool things about Legion, like the alternating activations. In that, it's really hype in Legion when you have like a duel happening, and it's like at the end of the activation, somebody swings, and then both players play 1 pips, and whoever wins the roll off gets to swing again and can potentially kill their opponent before they activate. It's a huge swing in terms of the game, and it's only possible because of like. All of the it's a good confluence of all these interesting mechanics. Yeah, and it's always been like that. It's been a consistently strong part of the game.
Super fun. When we play Legion, ultimately to have fun.
Yeah, and I think, and that's part of it too. It's interesting. It isn't true for all, but I think all
except
of
for
us,
Tony, he plays it to crash out.
That's a valid form of fun. I think all of us are pretty predominantly play Force users, right? I've never logged a tournament game. No, I've 3 tournament games where I didn't play Force user. I played General Grievous, who is.
I don't think Blaise, I think, is the only one of us who tends to be kind of 50-50 on the Force users. I think I know he's played Vader and Palpatine in the old game. But I think Blaise, you also you used to love the bounty hunters.
Yeah.
I don't think Blaise has been playing Force users recently.
Yeah, you cooled off on Vader.
I remember I made Cassian. I made Cassian Sabine back in the old rules and Rebels, but that's the only thing I can remember.
Mike is muted.
I think it went to bed.
I think Blaise. Yeah, maybe Blaise is asleep, or maybe that sandwich that was sitting out for 14 hours that he ate is finally catching up to him. Or maybe he's just going to the bathroom normally and forgot that we were on a podcast. There's many, many options.
Yeah, I think he did forget a couple times during this podcast.
That's fair.
That's okay.
But I think certainly the 3 of us have only played with Force users in recent history. I think ever since after I started getting reasonably competitive at the game, I realized Force users were my style. And I don't think I've logged a tournament without a Force user since my first year playing Legion.
I think Force users really exemplify the aspects of Legion of being able to play these epic command cards. Like Maul goes in, stops you from producing tokens, and tries to kill your Force user before it does anything. I think it really helps. They're kind of like Paul said in the beginning, they're scalpels. They're effective pieces that can really determine the outcome of a game, and it depends on how you use them. In certain battles, I think sometimes they're really good. Other times, I think they might be a little harder to wield, but I think they provide the most skill expression. I think that's what I enjoy mostly from Force users, because they can't be one note if you want them to be, but they could be multiple things if you kind of think and play with them a lot.
And I think part of why they've been fairly evergreen competitively, they've started to become less common now, especially as battle forces come out, that essentially most battle forces don't allow you to play Force users, or certainly there isn't any battle force that offers an advantage to playing a Force user, which is kind of dumb, but it is what it is. Maybe 501st, I guess, offers some advantages for Anakin, but not really. There is no Force user battle force that's buffs up Force users. But part of why they're kind of competitively evergreen is they many of the things that they do are very independent of dice. They're super predictable for you, the person playing them. Pierce, almost as long as you roll the hits, you can guarantee those pierce damage against many targets. Oftentimes it's a lot more like the predictability of an attack with Pierce is much higher than an attack that doesn't have Pierce. On defense, they don't take attrition. So if you play a game and you take 5 wounds off the bat with Anakin, but then you never take that 6th wound, there is no difference between a game where you took no wounds with Anakin. It's actually better for you, because presumably your opponent shot at Anakin thinking he would kill him, thinking your opponent would kill him, and they didn't. So that's like makes it predictable. You get like kind of like you can get like a last gasp with the Force user where they're still firing on all cylinders even though they've taken a lot of damage, which you can't get out of generic units, even vehicles. Can't really do that. So all of that is like really cool and reasons to play them. And then the Force. The big thing historically has been Force push, is not random at all. Now it's expensive enough. Yeah.
All right. Do you want to just finish this with everyone? Just want to name like one or two of your favorite, most interesting Force users to play with or against.
For me, my favorite Force user to play is Count Dooku. It always has been.
Even before he was good.
Yeah. I've been playing Count Dooku since was that like 2021, end of 2020, I think. No, 2021. 2021. It's the first tournament I played Dooku. That was back when he was 235 points. He didn't have suppressive on his weapon. He didn't have surge to block.
No direct.
He had no direct. He just had cunning and 3 command cards. And he was really good. He was really good then, and he's still good now. He gives you just insane control over the board through moving enemy units, through having cunning and going first, predictably in most matchups. And he has a ton of disruption to the enemy units. He can take away their order tokens. He can move them around. He can kill them super reliably with his weapon. Yeah, so I don't know. He's my favorite to play as, and I think in terms of playing against, the most fun unit to play against for me has always been Obi-Wan. He was in that base core set back in the day. And so a lot of like my early games of Legion were either playing Dooku or Grievous into Obi-Wan. And those 3 units, are essentially all designed in sort of relationship with each other. If you look at their cards, each of them often has a card that counters another one's card. And so there's a lot of mind games into what you play in a certain situation. So I've always loved that matchup of playing against Obi-Wan, even not with Dooku anymore, just because I know his cards so well, but also the cards he has, like Hello There and Knowledge and Defense, are sort of like inverse cards. One of them makes him almost unkillable, the other one makes the units around him unkillable, and you got to kind of read what the Obi-Wan player wants to do. And often, if you play the right cards, you can hard counter him. And if your opponent plays the right card, they can counter you, which is always fun. Yeah.
Jacob, what about you?
So favorite Force user to play originally, I think, was Rebel Ahsoka. I think she's still one of my favorites to play. I think there was always like a little math that went into. I always found it very interesting of like, oh, do I need to use these dodges for offense or defense? Doing like the math in my head. I had a lot of thematic battles, a lot of like objective play of like her speeding across the board on her 1 pip and getting a huge lightsaber attack on my opponent. It felt very thematic, and I think she's a great Force user for beginners because of like she has a lot of dice fixing mechanics with offense and defense with Jarkai Mastery. So it's really cool to be able to have some level of predictability. I think as a newer player playing Force users, she's definitely my recommendation as like the best starter Force user. And I think recently, not only because I won a GT with him, but I feel like Obi-Wan is super thematic and fun. I know Anthony thinks he's super boring. I think he's coming around to him a little bit. But I really think it's thematic to like the first couple rounds. He's like protecting his allies, like with his deflect shenanigans, feels like an episode of the Clone Wars. And then later on, it's kind of like, oh man, I guess I got to go in and do this myself, like, and chop up some guys.
Like one turn where he can turn on the gas.
Yep, like you play Hello there on round 3 or 4.
It's cool.
It feels very thematic. It feels fun. I've certainly had a lot of success with him. He fits my play style, and I've talked before in a previous podcast, I don't really love individual units that have to carry your army. So to me, he feels like he does a whole heck of a lot without having to like put the entire game on his back. And then as far as favorite playing against, I think I love playing against Darth Vader. It always feels like he's super fun to play against because basically my entire game plan is like, all right, how do I stop the unstoppable force and survive Darth Vader? And like some of the most fun games in Legion have been, whether I win or lose, have been like, how do I play around Darth Vader?
I think for the thematics of Obi-Wan, it's cool. I was just thinking about that, like what you said. If you look at like his fights in like the movies, particularly the movies, but also I think a little bit in the Clone Wars, oftentimes when he like wins a battle, it's because he has like one good move. Like he's on the back foot, and then he does one thing that like flips the fight. Like Grievous, not to be a Grievous Glazer, but Grievous was beating Obi-Wan's ass, literally physically with his hands. He was like throwing him around, punching him, and then Obi-Wan like pulls out the pistol right as he's like about to be killed and kills Grievous in like one attack. And
a civilized warrior for a civilized age.
Like he had to pull this one move, like this kind of like unpredictable move, and that's kind of what the Hello there card represents. It's like Obi-Wan's one chance to pull off one big turn. I
mean, you're right.
Work.
Yeah. Or against Maul in Phantom Menace, or against Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, like where he's on the back foot and just makes a tactical move that and
does something unpredictable and like suddenly like flips the fight. And in Legion games, it's pretty hard to get him to do that, but sometimes he can. Like I played a game against Liam the other day, and he landed the double attack on Grievous and killed him in like one round, like 2 big attacks.
The Hello there's fun.
Totally pummeling like his whole army with Grievous until that happened, but he was able to set up a scenario where he could land the double attack like with impunity and flip that fight.
Good job, Liam. Yeah, it feels like really thematic because he's outnumbered. He's like fully surrounded, and he's able to like pull up all these tokens and have a standby.
It's cool. Not like Anakin, like in the choreography for Anakin. Anakin often just like continuously attacks his opponent until they die, until he beats them, or he gets punked. Like that's kind of like what he does.
Pretty thematic.
It's kind of the same way. Like Anakin just keeps swinging his lightsaber until the opponent goes down, or Anakin dies because his defense isn't great. He just kind of blitzes your opponent. It's fairly predictable, but he like just swings. Yeah.
Blaise, you here? Your mic unmuted now? What's your favorite Force user?
Palpatine.
Oh.
Rip in peace.
Wait, who's that?
It's
is he in Legion or no? I don't think so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, what am I gonna say? Inquisitors.
Was he your favorite Force user to play in the old rules?
I thought Vader was your favorite.
Yeah, I don't know. Palpatine was definitely probably the Force user that I played the most. But yeah, I don't know. Vader is still probably my favorite, especially with like the addition of like the well, not really addition, but I really like how Darkness Descends plays in the new game. You know, really lets him dive right into your opponent's army, like basically off round 1, maybe round 2. So yeah, definitely Darth Vader. But yeah, as far as like the Force user that I like playing against the most, don't really have one. Playing Vader, I really
You like playing against Inquisitors because they suck.
They suck a lot, yeah. They're pretty bad.
You like playing against like Grievous, Dooku?
Grievous ain't a Force user. Don't put him in that category.
Dooku? You don't like playing against Dooku? Anakin.
I don't think anybody likes playing against Dooku.
Yeah, nobody
No,
likes
really explain.
Dooku's annoying. I hate Dooku.
Get punked.
I'd say
Again and again and again for 4
Yep.
years straight. Punked.
Yep.
Didn't see
Yep.
it coming for the 300th time.
Paul's definitely punked all of us every time of Dooku, and it never gets old for him. It gets old for us very, very.
I mean, at this point, I've played Dooku so much, and I've played at literally every possible Force user matchup except for the new generics. Like, it's super fun to be like, I know, I have a very strong suspicion of what cards you're going to play, and I know which of my 3 cards is going to interfere with that the most. And a lot of times, if you can interfere with their one big move, their hello there, like, move, then Dooku will kill them. Super fun. Super fun for the Dooku player, not so much fun for the opponent. You have to really get some crazy mind games going, I think, if you're going to beat Dooku in a duel. You're usually not. That's one where you probably stay away with most units.
I mean, the only time I've really been able to beat E or Dooku is if I had like Han Solo change of plans or some other like really good shenanigans that interfere with your interference.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
What's my?
All right.
All right, I think we talked about everybody's favorite Force users. I think we could probably land this plane. Okay, Tony. I forgot about you. Do you want to talk about the many Force users that you listed as your favorite?
I've listed many because I want to talk about them, but I'll just be short. I think my favorite is Yoda. I think he's like the most flexible piece. I like the little green guy. I like the idea of him like being on his one pip, just flying around, like swinging on people, like killing multiple units. Doesn't really happen in my games.
I think you actually like Mike Berry. I think you like Mike Berry.
Don't know what that podcast is. Don't know what that
I
is.
think you like Mike Berry.
I don't like Mike Berry. I'm gonna be real. I like Yoda after Mike Berry liked Yoda, but then after Mike Berry dropped Yoda, I was still liking Yoda, and then Mike Berry went back to Yoda, and I like Yoda
for Anakin.
because Mike Berry said so. So like, I would say Yoda and Anakin are my favorite Force users. Totally different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, now also Obi-Wan, low key. Obi-Wan is everything that they're both are.
We're not allowed to say it. No, stop. I'm officially putting a gag order. We don't want to spread the word that Obi-Wan is by far the best Force user.
Obi-Wan? Can you repeat that?
No,
Obi-Wan's
he's
good.
not. He's mediocre. He's mediocre, bro.
Obi-Wan's-
He does everything that Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Oh, as everything Anakin and Yoda does.
We don't want
So
Yes.
not
Tony
true.
as
It's
Republic
true.
players. We do not
true.
want Obi-Wan's
Obi-Wan
points to be
does
increased.
Everything that Anakin does in the game of Star Wars Legion.
Yes.
You take.
All right, that's foolish. That's just foolish.
That's objectively wrong.
He
Your Anakin
might be,
died
he might
round
be
two.
better than Anakin.
Your Anakin died round 2. My Obi-Wan did not die round 2.
But
Okay, but
they
like,
did something different.
No, Obi-Wan is the here's my Obi-Wan rant for about 2 minutes. Obi-Wan does everything that Gar players want, but they're afraid to play him because he's too boring. Unfortunately, Obi-Wan does everything that Gar players need: castling, defense, and have a decent offense, but they don't want to play him because he's really boring to
I think
play.
that's true. I
That
would
is-
say that he does. I don't think he is nowhere near Anakin in terms of offensive potential, and he is nowhere near as tricksy as Yoda. As sort of like he can't solo carry a game like Yoda can. But yeah, I do think that and Obi-Wan. I tried to keep the conversation away from Obi-Wan in this because he functions so differently from every Force user because he produces so much value by just standing there, that it really changes your terms of what you need him to do in a game. No other Force user, not even Yoda, who has guidance, can really just sit around like Obi-Wan can on the first 2 rounds. Not sit around, but can't.
He is
You can't
the
have such a
one.
rote
He is the
play
one
style.
Force user in the game, or one like semi-expensive Force user in the game that is timing neutral, like at all times.
He's like one of 2 Force users I think that if he doesn't swing his lightsaber, it's not necessarily like a bad thing. Like
Yeah.
I think Dooku, if Dooku like just lightnings and swing
There's
his
certain
lightsaber.
games where Dooku can do well without swinging his lightsaber. Usually that's because your opponent complicitly like ran away from him and just gave you advantages by running away.
Yeah, Obi-Wan is he's timing neutral, he's very solid, he could support the army, he's got decent offense, he's got solid command cards, he does some wacky stuff, he's got plenty of dodge tokens, he's got Cerezu, so he's consistent, doesn't really have those really bad spikes. He's very, very solid, but he's not carrying the game by two-shotting an ATST like Anakin is, you know.
Its value is produced by keeping the other units in your game alive.
Which in Republic is important when every unit you have is a high value, big punching unit.
And if there are any guard players out there, if you're like me and you're like me, it's like, oh, I don't want to play Obi-Wan. He's too boring. Drop the ego. He's really good. I had to drop my ego. I had to drop down and be like, I had to drop it. He's really good.
Anthony saw me win Everwinter and was like, okay, if this guy can win Everwinter...
Nobody saw you win Everwinter.
No, Anthony did. He watched the final game.
They were watching the more hyped second place game.
Also, it was an unofficial GT that had 4 games that ended at 4 games.
It was
Technically,
an official GT.
Nah,
Anthony had 4 games.
Anthony was not hype about Obi-Wan, and then he saw a little me winning in my first tournament with Republic, and was like, oh, wait, maybe this Obi-Wan guy's pretty good.
He got you there. He did get you.
I had to stoop down to the level of a lower guard player in order to figure out.
Lower guard player. You're a guard player.
Both
okay. All right.
Well,
the final thing is our new segment called Legion Homework, which is based on the idea that based on our takes, we got to actually play the game in order to get evidence to support our opinions. For me, I thought of this segment because I had made some strong claims about how strong I felt that range troopers were in the previous episode, so I decided to actually play them. I got 2 games with them. I don't have enough evidence yet to make like a definitive statement, but basically I wanted to bring this to other people on the podcast to challenge people to go out there and actually take your opinions and back them up with evidence beyond just having things on paper. Because I think that's something that we talk a lot about on the podcast, is the idea that playing the game of Legion is very different than looking at the unit cards and theorizing about how it works.
It's like kind of putting our money where our mouth is. Like, yeah, I think range troopers are really good. And after Paul plays
the homework assignment, Anthony, I think you wrote this. This is assignment for Blaise, right?
Yes, Blaise. You got to play a double bounty list with Boba and whatever bounty hunter you want. But I made you a list. It's right here. It's got Boba, Bosk, 2 scout troopers.
Pretty evil homework to be like, you said this unit sucks.
Sucks. Go play with it.
Yeah, I need you. You need to prove it to me. Because I always hear players like, oh man, I gotta go look on Longshanks for another list. I made you a list right here. I went to Longshanks, found you a list made by Anthony. I got you a list right here.
Just to play Anthony. Alright. Guys in detention.
Oh my god.
You have to play my Boba Fett double.
You really did give me homework, dude. It's a chore.
I mean, look, it's got EWAP. You have my Krennic.
Can we open this up so it's a double bounty list, but he could bring Callus if he wanted Callus as the second bounty hunter.
Yeah, I said Boba, another bounty hunter. It doesn't have to be boss.
Callus isn't like he's not a mercenary, but he has bounty.
But like, look at this. I made it.
Good luck, Blaise.
Yeah, shore trooper in it. A shore trooper, riot trooper, snow trooper of an Isle.
Basically, Blaise, your assignment is to play Boba Fett in a double bounty list, and report back on if he is truly as bad as we mocked him for.
Because I think he's good. I think we all said he's overpriced, but I think there's value to it.
Blaise about to be on call for the next year for his job. Oh, sorry guys, I got called into work.
Listen, because I
gotta pick up some extra shifts.
Yeah,
I hear Blaise talking about like he loves Boba. I'm like, all right, play Boba. He's like, oh, I didn't pack Boba. All right, I packed it for you.
I liked the Boba when he was good, dude. When he was like,
Paul played Dooku when he was bad. Paul played Dooku when he was bad for like 5 years.
Yeah, man, the Boba Fett situation, certainly on paper, is
Pretty horrific. Yeah.
But
Yeah, man.
we're gonna
You got
put
it,
it to the
Blaise.
test. Blaise,
Get
you
in
got
there.
it.
Just pretend that he's 30 points cheaper when you're playing him.
Yeah,
And I'm
pretend
sure
he's
you'll
110.
feel better.
Pretend he's 110.
Yeah, just forget when you just don't look at the actual list building and just pretend like he's like a reasonably costed unit and then then report back.
And then when you eventually win, you can be like, "Wow, Anthony was right about Boba Fett being good, even though he's overpriced. You can thank me later." Or if you lose with him, don't like accuse me of thinking I was just testing a theory. I didn't want to test a theory myself.
And if it's a competitive thing where you feel like you can't lose, just do what I do when I feel like I'm going to lose, and just make sure you tell your opponent, "Hey, this is just a for fun game."
This is just for fun, and you care more about it than I do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
I knew I was going to lose anyways before we started playing.
Yeah.
Already I conceded before the game started after I saw you. But
Yeah.
all right, what do you guys say? Let's land this ship.
No, let's land this. Let's
this plane.
let's hitch up this dewback. This wonderful dewback that we've been riding 4-man to the end here.
I hate Star Wars, man.
We're at the cantina. Hitch up the dewback. Stay sticky. This is Maple Syrup Mandos signing off.
Bye, everyone.